All right. So our final lesson covering the AWS crash course is talking about what Amazon calls the well-architected framework. Um, we'll talk a little bit about exam strategy, but we will review this later as well. I think that'll be a good reinforcer to look at in a week or maybe after the holiday again. So we're going to kind of put a bunch of pieces together. We're going to talk about the well-architected framework. We'll also talk about disaster recovery. So the well-architected framework is a big part of this test. They have something they call the six pillars. There's trade-offs. It relates to cost optimization. It relates to environmental sustainability for cloud workloads. And then there's a little bit about disaster recovery strategies. It's a lot of interesting stuff here, but we're just going to scratch the surface and learn some basic approaches, such as the pilot light strategy versus the multi-site strategy. We will talk a little bit about the final exam mindset as well. So let's go ahead and let's dive on in here. I do want to point out that um, these there are some actually really good resource links here. Amazon loves to talk about their well-architected framework, which will help you understand the pros and cons of decisions we make while building systems on the cloud. And their their disaster recovery strategies, right? And that's a nice diagram that actually we might come back to. But let's begin at the beginning and talk about the well-architected framework. So there's some important jargon terms here. The goal of the well-architected framework is to help us build secure, high-performing, resilient, efficient infrastructure. The well-architected framework has six pillars, each of which represents a set of best practices. You will see this not just on the cloud practitioner exam, but other AWS exams as well. So 6 months from now, or 3 months from now, or maybe even 2 months from now, when you guys start preparing for the AWS AI practitioner exam, because why not? It will come up again. So the well-architected framework is how AWS wants to give guidance to help folks structure designing, evaluating cloud workloads, following best practices. And then again, we see these key terms: security, reliability, cost efficiency. It's going to show up on the exam. What's its goal? Help teams build better cloud architectures with consistent principles and decision-making tools. It's got six pillars. Each pillar has its own best practices. They are guidelines to help you ask the right questions. For example, how do we design for failure? Well, if we're talking about failure, we're talking about resiliency, reliability, robustness. So this falls under the reliability pillar. How do I avoid unnecessary cost? There is a cost optimization pillar. There are some tools that AWS has. There is actually an AWS service called Trusted Advisor that will look over your whole account against core best practices, and it will actually evaluate many of these areas and provide actionable recommendations. So this one actually looks at your infrastructure and gives you actionable advice. It'll look at cost. Trusted Advisor will look at performance and fault tolerance. The well-architected tool is more of a self-assessment tool to review and improve your own workloads. It can include some suggestions. And here we have a nice diagram of the well-architected framework, right? We have the six pillar principles, the well-architected tool, the trusted advisor tool. So let's burn through these practice questions. And up next is, and apologies as I scroll up to our list here. I think we left off at Tony. Um, let's see, Bryson. I don't think Bryson is here. So let's hop to Alex. What's the purpose of the well-architected framework? So the purpose here, we're guiding cloud architecture for best practices, right? And so a lot of these questions are going to be gotchas. Um, and Sam, what tool is going to help me perform a self-assessment of my workload using these six pillars?
A well-architected tool.
Yes, sir, the well-architected tool. And Arnold, what is the AWS Trusted Advisor mainly used for? And it's used for recommending best practices in my AWS account, right? The Trusted Advisor looks for best practices. It'll check for cost optimization, performance, and security. Um, AJ, how many pillars make up the well-architected framework? And we might have a couple folks as Zoom ghosts right now. Unfortunately, the answer here is six. And finally, what pillar is going to focus on minimizing waste and matching supply with demand? So pretty quickly, we know it's not security. We know it's not reliability. I've got operational excellence or cost optimization. Anyone want to guess?
B.
Yeah, cost, right? Minimizing waste, supply and demand. Think, do I use an on-demand or reserved instance? So this is the well-architected framework, right? We kind of know the basics of it. We know it's got six pillars. We know we've got these two tools related to it and a little bit of how it maps to real questions. Let's just dive in and check out the next lesson here and dive more into these six pillars. This is actually pretty useful stuff. So I think it is worth taking some time to review this. So this well-architected framework, it's got six pillars. The pillars are security, secure, high performance, resilient, efficient, cost effective, and number six, environmentally responsible, right? These are best practices and design principles. They're not rigid rules. So just to kind of look at them at a glance, pillar number one, operational excellence. What does this mean? What's its focus area? Operational excellence means making sure stuff is running smoothly, monitoring how the system is, improving it. So automation, observability, quick rollbacks, security, right? Protecting data, systems, and assets. So IAM, encryption, CloudTrail for logging and auditing, reliability, think that things work as they're meant to. So this is disaster recovery, multiple availability zones, failover, performance efficiency, using our resources efficiently. So here we see auto scaling, right sizing, managed servicings. And there's some overlap now with cost optimization, right? Um, Avoiding waste and controlling spending. So billing alerts, um, on an S3 bucket, you can say when it should get rid of something. Maybe after 6 months, we want to, if I'm Tumblr, I want to get rid of an image after 6 months or something. So it can have a life cycle policy. And the sixth pillar is sustainability, reducing environmental impact. So you can actually choose energy efficient, like compute instances of EC2, and there's AWS regions that are considered green or more sustainable. So again, we have our six pillars. So this pillar, operational excellence, improvement, and operations. Can systems quickly recover? Are we automating common tasks? So there's some new terms here. Let's just look these up as we go so we can become familiar with them because they will show up. So let's look up AWS CloudWatch. So this is for monitoring and logging, right? For watching what our system is doing. And CloudFormation. AWS CloudFormation is that infrastructure as code service. So I can configure and easily deploy infrastructures, right? So I can spin up a whole infrastructure quickly. I can recover quickly. So infrastructure as code is part of operational excellence. And then code deploy is a new AWS service. There's a lot of these, right? And code deploy will automate deploying my Django app to an EC2, to a Lambda, deploying code to any AWS service, right? So this is operational excellence. Next up, we have the security pillar to make sure that things are secure and protected. We've got AWS IAM. Anyone remember what KMS stands for?
I think it was key management service.
Yes, sir. AWS Key Management Service related to encryption keys, and Cloud Trail for auditing and logging, right? Cloud Watch is for monitoring. Cloud Trail is for governance, for auditing and auditing purposes. Our reliability pillar is making sure that once things are up, one failure doesn't, crash the whole system, like say crashing an entire power grid, which I think happened to Texas a couple years ago, right? So we want some reliability. We want backups. We want failovers. We want an architecture that can take a blow and heal and keep on running. So we're going to want databases in multiple availability zones, or my whole infrastructure in multiple availability zones. Um, Route 53 for DNS routing, right? So that if for some reason, you know, the availability zone in California that I'm using goes down, well, I've got another availability zone on the East Coast, and Route 53 will route all my traffic there. And auto scaling groups, right? So these show up in a bunch of places because this is a part of reliability, is managing traffic. Next, we've got performance efficiently, using compute resources wisely, choosing the right instance type, and scaling. So again, some of these services show up for multiple pillars like auto scaling groups, lambdas, because their serverless functions can help us be efficient. And we have a new service here with a cool name, Aurora, that we haven't seen before. And Aurora is, in fact, Amazon's own relational database. It's compatible with MySQL and Postgres, but it's not MySQL or Postgres. And because Amazon created it, basically, um, well, really what Aurora provides is, excuse me, um, it provides, as it says here, performance and availability at a global scale. So we haven't talked a lot about database clusters, but there's a lot that goes into scaling a database and like data duplication and things like that and backup across multiple regions. Um, Aurora also, because Amazon has created it and tuned it to run on its infrastructure, is supposed to run really fast. So they kind of, they want to hype it up and they're saying, hey, you get really great performance with Aurora. You get really high availability. You get really great scale and it's cost effective. So AWS and the exam is going to be a fan of the Aurora database. We have the cost optimization pillar, minimizing costs, the tools that we learned about earlier, Cost Explorer, again, something like a life cycle rule for resource management and saving plans, and finally, sustainability. And we haven't talked about this one a lot. There's some jargon to unpack here. Amazon has designed their own chips for EC2. They've called it Graviton. They've given it a cool science fiction name. And their goal was to give really good performance for the price and be really energy efficient. Because if I'm AWS and I'm owning all these data centers, my energy bill is crazy expensive. So when I'm creating an AWS infrastructure, if I want, I can choose to use EC2s that are powered by Graviton, though it will in part depend on the AWS region. So some AWS regions, and note that they're talking about the well-architected framework here. Um, let's see if they talk about sustainability. So I was hoping they might have like a chart of regions. I don't think they do. They have a lot of other stuff. Um, you can see like they've got maps of like carbon intensity for different areas. But in essence, they don't quite have like a one size fits all guide or map, but they do have a process that's pretty detailed that if I'm working for Netflix, that I can use to choose an AWS region and actually pay attention to sustainability because there might be corporate sustainability goals. So let's dive into some of these practice questions. And I believe next up is Tom. Uh, so Tom, which of the following is not a six pillar? One of the
See.
six pillars. Yeah, elasticity. It's a cloud benefit. Way back from the first lesson, it's really easy to spit up additional workloads and scale, but it's not one of the well-architected pillars. And again, just lots of reps and sets on these questions is how you get these ones. Um, Ryan, what pillar focuses on automation, monitoring, and continuous improvement?
Is it B?
Yes, sir. Operational excellence is about automation, monitoring, and continuous improvement. In Cricket, what AWS service helps fulfill the security pillar by auditing API activity?
Oh, uh, Trail. I
So
think
let's
C.
use the, sorry,
Cloud Trail.
CloudTrail. Yes, sir. Good job. And I was going to say, this is a great question to use the process of elimination as like a test taking strategy. If I'm looking at this question and I see auditing API activity, I think monitoring, I think logging. So A and B, I strike off, and I've now basically got a 50% shot at it without even knowing what these are. And again, I think the right sort of mnemonic is like the cloud trail is for like tracking the trail for auditing and logging. Good job, man. And um, Rick, what pillar is concerned with minimizing your environmental impact? And this one is a gimme, and the
Hold
answer
on.
here is C.
Yeah, it's sustainability.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
I'll tackle this one, the last one. Which practice best supports the reliability pillar? So the reliability pillar is about disaster recovery and fault tolerance and failover. So I'm thinking availability zones. I'm thinking auto scaling. I'm thinking disaster recovery. So it's not encrypting. It's
B.
not about security. It's not about logging, but I've got multi-availability zone deployments and we've got B. So these are the six pillars. They are going to come up a lot. This part is, I think, one of the vaguer parts where you really just have to do enough practice questions to kind of know how the mind of the exam works, right? Because some of these are going to have a gray zone. And the way to tackle that again is just lots of reps and sets on practice quizzes and questions. Do a lot of them, fail fast. There's no secret sauce. And in some ways, it's good news that the answer is simple. And on the exam, questions will probably describe a situation or a failure, and they might ask what pillar was violated or which AWS service supports a specific principle. And again, this is not a let me think hard about it. This is a I'm just going to do a whole bunch of quizzes and practice questions so that I kind of have seen most of these by the time I hit the exam. Um, all right. Up next, we have disaster recovery. Why don't we take a short 5 minute break and then we'll dive on in? Sound good? All right, gentlemen, thank you very much, and I'll see you all in 5 minutes. All right. So one of those six pillars was reliability. I hope I'm remembering the pillar name correctly, but that was the essence of it. You'll hear reliability, resilience, fault tolerance. Fault tolerance and resilience are technically sort of different things, but they all cover the same concept. And a huge part of that comes down to disaster recovery, right? The power goes out for a whole state or a whole city, or someone screws up a config and like a huge service drops and breaks stuff, and high availability. Everyone all over the world can stream movies over Netflix. So disaster recovery is about ensuring business continuity in the face of failures from whatever source. Um, AWS provides a bunch of strategies to help with this, both quickly and cost effectively. And the exam is going to test these disaster recovery strategies because some are cheap and some are expensive. So, disaster recovery is about strategies and tools used to restore this access to a system after a failure or outage. And again, if you think about, you know, if Twitter goes down, it's not the end of the world. If Google goes down, that's these days, Google is kind of almost a critical service. So downtime is how long a system is down for. If Amazon.com, the shopping website, goes down during Christmas shopping, that's a lot of money they're going to lose. And then if something goes wrong and crashes, we have to worry about data loss. So these things are measured with some specific terms. One is about how quickly can we restore the system, recovery time objective. How much data loss is okay, because we're not dealing in perfection here. Recovery point objective. If I am Twitter and our service goes down and we recover and we lose the last 5 minutes of tweets, probably not too bad. If we recover and we lose the last 2 days of tweets as a business, that is more challenging, right? Um, if I'm a bank, I really can't afford much data loss at all. So there's a lot of variance here. Recovery time objective, how quickly a system can be restored. Recovery point objective, how much data loss is acceptable. So let's talk about disaster recovery strategies. So backup and restore. We back up data, say to an S3 bucket. We restore it manually when we need it. Um, it's got a high recovery time objective. It might take a long time to do. We might lose a lot of data. This is basically the simplest way, make a backup of your file. And as a company, I might say, hey, I'm going to back up the database every 3 months. In which case, my recovery point is every 3 months if we lose something and have to go to the last backup. Maybe I back up every week. Maybe I back up every day. But the backup and restore strategy is simple, which means it's easy to implement and it's cheap. A step up is something called the pilot light strategy. Like on your stove, the gas stoves have a little pilot light that's always running. Um, Core systems run in the cloud with everything else off. So you always have core systems running if everything else crashes. And this can reduce the amount of time it takes to recover and reduce the amount of data loss, but it costs more money. Then there's something called warm standby, where you have basically a duplicate full environment that's always running, but you have a smaller version of it. Um, this is going to be You're going to have a lot less loss and it'll take a lot less time, but it's a lot more expensive. And finally, there's multi-site or hot strategy where you have the full production environment in multiple regions. This is really expensive, but you'll have very little loss. And just to draw a quick graphic here, let's draw the cloud. And I've got my cloud. And let's give ourselves some availability zones here. And we'll have one that's here and here. And we'll label this like US East 1, and we'll label this one US West 1. And I'll just use circles for the different services. So if I'm doing backup and restore, I might just have an S3 bucket with database backups, and that might be it, right? Maybe for the pilot light, I also want to make sure that I have, my EC2 running my backend server running in the cloud. And so I get some cloud reliability here. And let's add in a database as well. And we'll make these guys a little smaller. And let's have our database. And so for warm standby, maybe I decide I'm going to have my database in 2 availability zones. But then for a full hot deploy, and again, this is very much a simplification. There would be a lot more stuff. I'm going to have my full infrastructure running in 2 completely different availability zones. So again, this is a oversimplification, but hopefully it provides a bit of a visual aid to these different strategies. So these are our main disaster recovery strategies. And as you can see, it's really a question of cost, which is not just about money, but engineering effort. Because the more complex something is, the more time and effort it takes to maintain it, the more fragile it is. So there's a lot of trade-offs involved here. So we also have this term high availability, right? And this is not about disaster recovery, but about redundancy. So disaster recovery is something has failed and we want to recover. High availability is about everyone's going on our website for Christmas shopping and I don't want the traffic to crash us. So high availability is about keeping systems online, where again, it's about scaling up multiple availability zones and databases and load balancers. And there's going to be a bunch of new AWS services here that get introduced. I'm not going to go through each of them and Google them, but Glacier is storage along with S3. You can have a multi-availability zone database. Route 53 we're familiar with for DNS. There's Cloud Indoor. Elastic Load Balancer is going to do load balancing for us, and then auto scaling we've talked about before. So I would flag Glacier and Cloud Indoor to do some Googling on a little bit later. Let's dive in and let's do some practice questions. And I think we might have gotten all the way to the bottom again. Tom, what disaster recovery strategy has the lowest cost but the longest recovery time? So I'm gonna jump in here just in the interest of time. And I apologize, guys. Normally I like to give us space, but I know we've had a long day. The answer here is backup and restore. So backup and restore is the cheapest option. It's the simplest. And again, think about just backing up my database to a file every month. It's cheap, it's simple, it's going to take the longest to recover, the longest to restore from. Question number 2, what AWS feature supports high availability for a database? And the answer here is C, right? Having my relational database service across multiple availability zones provides built-in failover for databases. Question 3, I want a low, oh man, recovery time objective. I struggle with these acronyms. Cost-effective way to keep a minimal version of your environment online. Which strategy is best? So can someone maybe try to like say in your own words what this question is asking? What do they want us to, what does the business want? Does the business want the cheapest possible option? No, they don't want the cheapest because they're telling us we want to be able to not lose a lot of data. Low RTO means we don't lose a lot of data when we recover, or RTO, I believe, is recovery time objective. We don't want to have to spend too long recovering, but I don't want to spend too much money. I want a minimal environment of a version of my environment online. So I want something better than the cheapest option. So it's not backup and restore, which is the cheapest. Multi-site is like the most advanced. Multi-site, think a full duplication of everything, right? This is our multi-site availability. This is the Cadillac of disaster recovery. So we've got Pilot Light, which is a step up from nothing, and Warm Standby. And I'm going to go with Warm Standby. And actually, I got it wrong. So the Pilot Light strategy keeps essential services warm and ready to scale up. What's the difference, the key difference between disaster recovery and high availability? So I can rule off option A right off the bat, right? We're talking about cross tiers, not really what we're doing. Disaster recovery doesn't support AWS. That's obviously a non-answer as well. High availability prevents failure. Disaster recovery responds to failure. Okay, that sounds probable. Disaster recovery is automatic. High availability is manual. This one is also sort of a nonsense answer because I understand that whether a process is automatic or not has nothing to do with either of these. And frankly, it depends on the strategy. So just by the process of elimination, I'm going to guess C. And indeed, high availability prevents failure. Disaster recovery responds to failure. Finally, what AWS service helps with DNS failover in a multi-region setup? So this is a bit more of a complex question, right? We're talking about disaster recovery with something that I'm actually not that familiar with. We'll Google DNS failover in just a moment. But I'm going to take a guess at this and try to rule stuff out. Well, AWS config is about configuring an infrastructure at code. So I'm going to rule that one out. Route 53, I think, has to do with DNS stuff. So that seems like it might be a good answer. ELB is the elastic load balancer. Maybe. S3, that's a storage. That's a file server. It's object storage, an S3 bucket. So it's probably not D. So I've got it down to B and C now, and I'm going to go with B. And the answer is indeed B. The Route 53 DNS router can route users to healthy regions when something fails. And let's Google DNS failover real quick and see what it is. So basically, if a server fails, DNS failover will automatically route traffic from the failing one to a healthy one. Or if a whole availability zone or region goes down, Route 53 will route it from the one that's down to the good one. So we've covered disaster recovery strategies. These terms, recovery time objective and recovery point objective for how long does it take to get the system back up from recovery? How much data do I lose? And I think the one thing to remember with these that can be tricky is lower is better, right? Lower means less recovery time, less data loss. High availability is about preventing failure and not failing, and disaster recovery is about responding to failure and some real world questions. So our last one, and I think we'll kind of cover the final review in brief, is cost and sustainability. Why don't we take 5 and then we'll hit cost and sustainability. Thank you guys very much, and I'll see you all in 5 minutes. All right, so the last piece for us to talk about when it comes to the 6 pillars of the well-architected framework are the final 2 pillars, cost optimization pillar and the sustainability pillar. Right, the cost optimization pillar and the sustainability pillar. So, cost optimization, minimize unnecessary spend, maximize business value. What does this mean? Right sizing, don't use more than I need. Don't use too big of an EC2. Auto scaling, a favorite of everywhere. Turning off idle resources, saving plans or reserved instances, store less access data, an S3 Glacier or intelligent tiering. So Glacier, let's take a quick Google on this one because this is a new one. Glacier is a version of an S3 bucket for that file, that object storage. It's for long-term secure stuff, for durable stuff, and it's cheaper. It's for data archiving and it's cheap, right? So again, if I'm Tumblr, images like that are more than a year old that no one's looking at anymore, maybe I decide to put them in Glacier. And S3 buckets have lifecycle policies, and this has come up a couple times. So let's do a quick Google on this one. And as it says here, for something I stick in an S3 bucket, I can set rules that decide like automatically after maybe 3 months, maybe I move them to Glacier or I delete them based on age or other rules. So I can automate a lot of this stuff. Relevant AWS services, of course, anything related to cost, budget, and cost explorer, trusted advisor, because this automated tool gives us advice on cost optimization, auto scaling, because auto scaling is good and it can spin EC2s up and down, and the S3 lifecycle rules. So that's the cost pillar. The sustainability pillar is new. It focuses on environmental sustainability, which is, I think, pretty obvious. It's got some core practices. There are some sustainable regions powered by renewable energy. Which regions are sustainable? It looks like they have a bunch now that are powered by renewable energy. It looks like they have a graph here. And it looks like there's a whole document about how to do this. So the exam isn't going to like quiz you like, is the US East region sustainable or not? It's just really going to ask, how do you like implement the sustainability pillar? Well, you select a sustainable region that's powered by renewable energy. Using this more energy efficient custom-built AWS Graviton processor, re-architecting like a serverless Lambdas and like a serverless architecture kind of uses less resources, or managing workloads. So important point, there's 2 different kinds of serverless resources. There's 2 different kinds of serverless tools with AWS. We have Lambda, which is for serverless functions and serverless computing. I can run my code. I don't have to think about servers or clusters or anything. And AWS Fargate, which we haven't talked about a lot. They call it a serverless compute engine. Basically, I can stick Django in a container and run all of Django and stop it so it only runs whenever it's needed. So Fargate is a serverless pay-as-you-go compute engine. So you don't have to think about server management. So Lambda and Fargate are AWS's two main serverless tools in the toolbox. Optimizing compute and storage, archiving unused data. So good to file away. Does AWS want to be 100% renewable? Yes. There is a customer carbon footprint tool for carbon reporting. So if you see the term on the exam, minimizing environmental impact, that's the sustainability pillar, right? So we've got cost optimization. We're talking about right sizing resources, auto scaling, saving plans, sustainability. We're talking about sustainable regions, use managed services, reduce waste. Let's dive on to the good part. Questions. I'm just going to go from the top here. So I lost track of where we were in the order. So, Ryan, what AWS feature helps reduce storage costs for infrequently accessed data? And Ryan, what I'd like you to do actually, let let walk me through the problem. I would like every time I call on you guys now, I want you to walk through each option and either say yes, it's an option or no and cross it off the list so we get to dig into it a bit. You know what I mean? So like A, yes, I think we can keep it because of XYZ, or no, it's not an option because of XYZ, and move through each of them in order, and then we'll see what the answer is, and you know, make your final selection. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. Let's see how I do.
Good deal. First
All
out
right.
the gate. I love it.
A, I think does not make sense. So I think we can remove it. Uh, B, auto scaling, I think makes sense for this.
Okay.
And C, I can't remember. I don't, the last two are similar, so I think they would be together. Maybe the first two don't make sense.
So what do you think C and D, like what, if you had to guess, what does a VPC flow log do?
Um, I don't know. I think, but I would go with one of the last two, I guess.
Got it. Yeah.
Um, maybe it is future reduce storage costs. I would
Let's,
say D.
all right. And the answer
Wow.
here,
Okay.
yeah, the answer here is actually A. And I should have asked you to explain the questions.
Yeah.
No, but you did a great job, man. And let me kind of walk through this the way that I see it. If I'm looking at this question, let's put A off to the side. Let's put B off to the side. Let's talk about C and D. I don't know what a VPC flow log is, but I know it's got something to do with logging data because it's got logs in the name. If we're talking about logging, I'm guessing it's not going to have to do with reducing storage costs. CloudTrail logs, again, logging because it's got logs in the name. I'm guessing it doesn't have to do with storage costs. So I'm going to cross these off. Um, Finally, if I'm thinking about reducing storage costs, here it depends a little bit more on knowledge of what these are. If I can remember that auto scaling is about spinning up more EC2s, it's about load balancing, right? Spinning things up and then getting rid of them. I can kind of ask myself, does that have to do with storage? And the answer is probably no. And by a process of elimination, get to A. I realize that this takes a bit more knowledge and that part might not be as easy. But getting rid of C and D at least gives you 50% odds for A and B, at which you got to, which is good. And the reason A is correct is because an S3 bucket is where you store files, media, images. A lifecycle policy is about the life cycle of data in the bucket. when do I delete it or move it into cheaper storage? And so that's how it connects to reducing storage costs. Yeah, Ryan, great job, man, and thank you. Next up is Cricket. And Cricket, for number two, can you walk through each of these multiple choice options and tell me if you think it's a good option or a bad option and should be crossed off the list, and then we'll see what the answer is.
Minimize workload.
Yes, sir.
I believe turn off the cloud trace is not right. I'm pretty sure D is not right. Mm, avoid serverless service, minimize in parallel. Number
What about C? Yes or no?
avoid the serverless service. Uh, Still wrong because
All right.
avoid serverless service.
And then between A and B, which one do you want to choose?
I'm not sure. I think workload related to the like a processor thing or something like that.
Yeah,
Minimize it.
let's check it out. And good job walking through it, man. Yeah, so the answer here is B, right? So this Graviton processor, it's a chip that Amazon made and it's more energy efficient. So the question, minimizing environmental impact, how can I be more energy efficient? How can I be more sustainable? Um, yeah, and the answer is B, Graviton processor. I want to point out something real quick. CloudTrail is about logging and auditing. A question, turning it off, Cricket, you were totally correct. Like, this is never going to be the answer to anything. We're never going to want less logging or auditing. Um, in general, you're not going to, you usually want a serverless workload. So that's probably going to be avoided. And then between A and B, Cricket, exactly like you said, Graviton is kind of the keyword here. Thank you, man, and good job. Um, Rick, can you walk us through the options for question three and explain why you think each one is or isn't a choice for provides which service provides insights into how much AWS costs and where savings can be made?
Yeah, I got it. All right. So which service provides insights into how much AWS cost and where savings can be made? All right. So AWS IAM, that has more to do, I don't believe, because that has more to do with authentication,
Mhm,
not really costs. And then you
mhm,
got AWS Shield, that's more of protecting your server from attacks, so has really nothing to do with costs.
mhm.
You got Cost Explorer, that might be an option, and you got AWS Config. So AWS Config is really just like configuring your service and your server. So I'll go with C, AWS Cost Explorer.
Makes sense. Let's check out the answer. And you're bang on. And
Yep.
yeah, great analysis too. And this question, the fact that like, we had Cost Explorer in the name here, and like you said, without even knowing what these are, the names help a bit here. Sometimes they don't. Yeah, the answer is definitely C. Thank you, man, and good job. And
Yep.
Chris, question four, what does AWS recommend for archiving data with minimal ongoing cost?
Um, Trying to recall what S3 standard was. Um, I think we can scratch off B with the RDS, and I don't remember remember what S3 standard was. I don't know. I'm stuck between Glacier and Intelligent right now,
Which one
or
do you want
C
to
and
go
D,
for?
because they're both use the infrequent data. Um, uh, yeah. I don't know. I'll probably go with option D.
Cool. All right, so the answer here was C. Um, this is a tricky one in terms of like if I don't know what some of these are, there's not a lot of hints here. Uh, so I actually have not seen S3 intelligent tiering before. I'm not sure what that is, though we can find out real quick. And automatically moves your data between storage tiers based on access patterns. So that's related actually. S3 standard is basically your standard S3 storage bucket. The main piece of information here is S3 Glacier is the cheap long-term storage, right? So for archiving data as in long-term, like years with minimal cost, that's going to be Glacier. And this is one where for this question, it just depends on practice and memorization. The process of elimination helps, but it's still a bit of a toss-up. Yeah, good job, man, and thank you. And let's check out number 5. Uh, and Tony, if you could tackle this one, which of these aligns most with the cost optimization pillar?
Well, good, you gave me the easy one. I would immediately eliminate A and D as they're both security based, so I don't think they would align with cost optimization. Um, B, I guess, could align with cost optimization, but it seems like it would be kind of counterproductive. I would go with C, turning off idle dev test instances.
Cool. Let's check it out. Yes, sir. Turning off idle. Turning things off, minimizing and good resource utilization and right sizing, always going to be a good cost optimization strategy. Um, yeah, B is so B guys is a little bit of a gotcha. This is sort of you wouldn't you, this is sort of like the opposite of like a disaster recovery or high failover strategy. And they're trying to trick you because it's like, oh, you only use one availability zone. So the phrasing here can be a bit of a hint. And then D kind of leads into the answer. Yeah, good job, guys. And hopefully walking through it this way is useful. On these kinds of exams, you're better off moving fast. Speaking from experience, having in the past taught GRE test prep classes and done this and a bunch of similar things over the years, this certification, uh, trust your gut, move on. It's really a probability game. Getting one question right or wrong is not important. Being able to like reduce a lot of those questions to like 50% odds, because through the process of elimination is how you get a good score. And obviously just through practicing and doing a bunch of these questions. So we've covered cost optimization and the sustainability pillar. Um, and this is really our final content from our last day 4 lesson. We do have one more part here talking about exam strategy, and we'll talk about this a little bit. Um, and I think we might save the questions to tackle for another day, both in the interest of time and so that we can get some practice in on our own. So this is about exam mindset for the exam. We're going to talk about exam strategy, a couple tricky things, and some main takeaways. There's also a glossary at the bottom of this that I'll point you to. The final practice questions, I think we'll save, and during stand-up one day we'll move through them. So thinking like AWS, exam strategy. This exam tests how AWS thinks. It's always going to want us to choose the most secure option. Multi-factor authentication, IAM roles, encryption. Like turning off encryption is never going to be an answer for anything. So you're always going to want more security. Um, you're usually going to want to have less, not more, avoiding over provisioning, serverless spot instances, right sizing. AWS is almost always going to want you to focus on availability, on resiliency and scaling, right? And so that's why for that question we just saw, like not using an availability zone is not really going to be an answer unless they're talking about like cost efficient, like cheaper disaster recovery strategies. When you hear about like using less availability zones or less scaling, it's probably not the answer. Because the AWS exam is by Amazon, we're going to be trusting the services AWS provides. So trust AWS services unless told otherwise. When in doubt, least access and least privilege, least cost, most security is the way to go. So common mistakes, tricky topics. Some common mistakes. We haven't talked a lot about serverless. It really is in a lot of the ways the go-to tool for sort of back-end architectures these days. If you're not sure and the choice is between EC2 and a serverless option like Lambda, the answer is probably Lambda. Um, Ignoring the shared responsibility model, right? I have to know what I do, what I'm responsible for as a customer versus what AWS is. Confusing all of this jargon, elastic file storage, S3 bucket, elastic block storage. You're going to have to just come up with some mnemonics to remember what these are. And also, frankly, again, the best way to memorize this is just do a bunch of questions and know when to use the S3 bucket for object storage, elastic file storage we haven't seen, or elastic block storage that's used for EC2s and databases. Missing the trusting advisor tool. This is the tool that provides real-time best practices by looking at your actual AWS account and infrastructure. Elastic load balancer. There's some different kinds of load balancers. We haven't gone into them. Really, again, the best way to do this is you just do a bunch of practice quizzes, and when you're done, you look up the things that you don't know, and then you see them again. It's not worth digging too much into these, but specificity over the sort of more general choice here, I think, is the mindset. So let's just do maybe like 3 of these, and then we'll call it a day. Anyone want to volunteer to tackle number 1? And I'd like you guys to walk through it and walk through each option. Why don't I do number 1 and then I'll call on someone for number 2? So, number 1, which AWS service should be considered for building applications in a fully serverless architecture? So, right away from looking at this question, I know where they want me to go. We want something that's serverless. Well, Elastic Block Store, just the fact that it has store as in storage is going to rule it out for me. Amazon Dynamo DB, again, DB is for database. So even if I don't know what it does, because it's a database and it's not related to serverless, I'm probably going to rule it out. And now I've got AWS, I've got EC2, I've got Lambda, I've got Fargate. EC2 is the virtual server in the cloud. So I'm going to cross that one out. And now we're down to Lambda and Fargate. And at this point, without knowing a lot about each, it's a bit of a toss-up. Let's look at the answer and then we'll explain why. So the answer here is B. Sorry, and I got a little confused by how this answer was written. So Lambda and Fargate are both serverless tools. Fargate is a little more complex. It's not completely serverless. It's kind of like of on-demand. I think the way to think about it is Lambda is more serverless than Fargate. Fargate is sort of a hybrid between serverless and EC2. I think that's going to be the simplest way to explain it. So I think the takeaway here is if we're talking about fully serverless, we're talking about a Lambda function. This is like the core serverless thing. How about um, let's see. Tony, do you want to tackle and walk through number two?
I can definitely try.
Go for it, man.
And just a heads up on that first one, I think it was B, C, and E are all the right answers there
Oh,
because it said to
really?
select three.
Oh, did I totally misread that?
Yeah, it says select three on there. I think it was saying EC2 and EBS require server management, and the others are
I'm so
serverless.
sorry.
So
Yeah, I actually don't think that shows up on, I'm not sure they ever do that on the test, though. I could be wrong. So, yeah. So let me just add to that just to break it down a bit more. Fargate and Lambda are sort of easy gimmies. The reason DynamoDB is here is it's a NoSQL database, and you often use NoSQL databases in serverless architectures. So, sort of from most to least serverless related, it would go in this order. And Tony, thank you for breaking that down because I totally got confused there. So I really appreciate that. Thank you.
no problem.
Yeah, and let's tackle
Okay.
number two.
So a company is using AWS Trusted Advisor for best practices. Which issues will it flag? Um, Upcoming user interface changes, low utilization. So I'm not really sure if this is a multiple choice. If it's not, I would go with B, the low utilization, because I know it does that.
Yeah, I
I
think this
don't.
is we should assume it's a choose one unless it says otherwise.
Okay, then I would go with B. A doesn't really fit with what we learned on that already. The open access S3 buckets, that sounds more like something security side. And then the exposed IAM access keys, that seems more of a authentication side. And then AWS service outages. I think that the trusted advisor is more for efficiency, so I would take that one out as well. I go with B.
Yeah, and I hope I'm right that it's just one correct answer here.
Oh, it is it's B, C,
Okay,
and D.
I apologize. I led you wrong. I'm sorry about that. Um,
That's all right.
I may update these. Again, I actually don't think the exam itself has. Uh,
The practice exams had a couple of the select three. I
oh, they
don't know if
do.
that they
Okay,
do.
okay. Then it might show up. I apologize though. We should have mentioned here which in the exam it does make it clear. Yeah. So your reasoning is pretty much spot on, man. And I would just want to point out two things, guys. Upcoming user interface changes. Who changes the user interface? The customer, right? This has nothing to do with AWS. So Trusted Advisor is not going to do it. AWS service outages. If a service is down, the Trusted Advisor is not going to tell us about it. Um, and Tony, my guess is you would have identified if you had known this was a multiple choice that identifying security issues would make sense for a Trusted Advisor tool to do. Good job, man, and thank you. And Rick, do you want to tackle number three?
Yeah, let me see here. All right, three. Media Store Inc. needs file system style access from EC2 to file stored in in S3. Which service should we use? Okay, EC2 is just a normal instance. S3 has to do with what file storage, I think. All right, so Elastic File System, uh, possibly S3 File Gateway has to do with S3, so I'd say possibly EBS. Crap, I can't remember what EBS is. I'm pretty sure it's not Transit Gateway because that really didn't have anything to do with the gateway. I'm not sure what EBS is, so I'm gonna just go on and cancel that one out. I don't think it has anything to do with the gateway, so I want to say A, elastic file system doesn't have anything to do with gateways.
Yeah, I think that's a good process of elimination.
Oops,
Yeah,
almost. Yeah, it's
yeah,
the S3 gateway. All right.
yeah, yeah. And this one, I think your process of elimination was pretty good, man. EBS is elastic block storage, which is like the hard
Oh, okay.
drive, the virtual hard drive for an EC2 compute or like an RDS database. We actually haven't seen Elastic File System or S3 File Gateway. Um, honestly, using the names is tough because sometimes the names make sense and sometimes it's completely hopeless to go by the name. In this case, my only bit of feedback would be just because this throws S3
Yeah,
and
the name.
file in the same name, that would probably be
Yeah.
my choice just if I'm going, if I don't know what they do, just looking at the question. But this is definitely a
Yeah.
strong second
All right.
candidate, without a doubt. Um, yeah,
Yeah.
good job, man. And thank you. And let's look up Elastic File System just so we can see what it is because we haven't seen this. Um, and so this lets us share files specifically without having to worry about databases or S3 buckets or anything like that. And it scales. And if we look up AWS S3 file gateway, this gets a little more complicated. It looks like it's providing on-premise. So a computer that's running, say, not in the cloud, but my business actually owns the physical machine. It's a way for it to get file-based access. And I guess it must be used often with EC2s as well. Though the description is a little different than what we're seeing here. And if we search AWS Transit Gateway, we see that this is, as you pointed out, completely different. A cloud router for connecting multiple Amazon virtual private clouds. Yeah, good job, man, and thank you. And again, this is why just doing lots of questions is the way to go here, because this is too much stuff. And rather than like memorizing all this in advance, I'd rather do a practice test, bomb, and then go back and review things. There's a lot more of these questions. I think these are good to do, and we'll tackle some of them next week. And then also down here, and this is really useful, guys, we do have a bunch of core vocabulary, right? So you could feed this into your AI study buddy. You could make flashcards out of it. You could print it out. You could stick it in a file. Um, you could try to quiz. I think flashcards actually would be a good way to go, like, because these are kind of probably the most common things that you'll see. So this one, it might be worth you just make some flashcards on paper and like test yourself on it, and that'll take you pretty far. Right. And we've covered gotchas. We've seen some more of the realistic multi-select questions. And my apologies for the confusion there. We have this useful glossary, and there's more practice quizzes and a final exam. So again, this is about learning how AWS wants us to think for this. And hopefully this will be useful. You guys are going to dive in, and I think you'll find that with practice, the exam is actually pretty straightforward. So that's all she wrote, and thank you guys very much.